Thank you, Mike, and thanks to all of you for having me today. One of the great things about Reading is that not every event about climate change has to involve or be organised by the council. And this is a very good example of that, and that's not the case everywhere you go. So I'd like to start by just congratulating Mike and the team at NatWest, the colleagues at Ethical Reading, Reader, Crow, and others from the Reading business community who have put this event together, and really showing such great leadership in this area. Previous two speakers had bags of cash to wave in front of you. I'm afraid I have no such thing, so I'd have to try and hold your attention by other means. So as Mike said, I joined the council in 2019, shortly after the council declared a climate emergency. Somewhat optimistically, joined on a 2-year contract. To everyone's amazement and disappointment, I couldn't fix it in 2 years. So my reward for failure was to have my contract made permanent last year. And in the blink of an eye, I found myself almost a third of the way through this critical decade that we have to meet our ambitious targets for getting to net zero. And I don't need to remind everyone here that it is a critical time. Our local Member of Parliament, Alok Sharma, in the process of handing over the presidency of the COP, I think spoke for many of us this weekend when we referred to the shortcomings of the COP27 process. And that was a really important reminder that Akhil reiterated this morning, that we can't just leave this to international negotiators to fix, and that regional and local action have a critical part to play. But I should say that taking climate action is not exactly a new thing for Reading. The first climate strategy for the town was actually produced in 2008 by the Reading Climate Change Partnership, a body which is still going strong. And we are now in our third iteration of that strategy in the form of the Reading Climate Emergency Strategy, which the council and other partners produced together, and the council unanimously endorsed it back in 2020. Before I say a bit more about what we're doing to contribute to that strategy, which is very much owned by the wider community, and what we're doing in this space, just a bit of context on the scale of the problem we're trying to solve. So this is Reading's carbon footprint by the official government metric. Not a perfect measure, so this is a measure of production emissions, so emissions we generate in Reading rather than consumption emissions, which is the stuff we consume and eat, which is a much bigger number. But this is kind of about the best data we have for our local sort of share of the national pie. And you can see from that, just under 40% is kind of commercial and industrial emissions, just over 40% is domestic, and about 21% transport. And this, by contrast, is the council as an organisation. These are our own corporate emissions, so a measure of direct emissions from our buildings, our fleet, and purchased electricity and gas. And you can see from that, again, that the biggest segment is buildings, a combination of electricity and gas that we're using for our space heating, but also fleet, a significant chunk of the pie. And to put that last slide in the context of the first, council emissions is the little blue sliver, and everybody else in Reading, that's the pale blue segment. And if you needed a better illustration of why we have to work in partnership and why we're so committed to that, I think this slide is it. So less than 1.5% of the total for Reading by that measure. But I include this slide, not to diminish the council's responsibility for Reading's emissions, but just to illustrate the importance of everyone putting their shoulder to that wheel. And it's fair to say that the council has influence, which goes well beyond that sliver of the pie shown there. Committee on Climate Change, which is the government's statutory advisor on climate, said in 2021 that around a third of UK emissions are under the influence of local authorities. And we certainly have a key role to play beyond that little sliver of direct emissions that I've talked about, whether that be through the signals we send through our procurement and commissioning activity, our place shaping and regulatory role through our planning and transport functions, for instance, the partnerships we build to deliver shared aims, or the influence that we can have if we engage and communicate with the wider community. And if you want to do business with the council, and indeed any part of the public sector, increasingly, this is a language that you will need to understand, and the expectations you can expect to rise over time. And what was great today is to hear other parts of the business community offering you help to do that, and you'd be well advised to take them up on that. Now, in the centre of that onion is a slide on leading by example. And I think we recognise, we don't always get this right. I'm sure when we get to Q&A, someone will throw some example of something dreadful that the council's done at me, which seems to fly in the face of our carbon reduction commitments, and I will do my best to take that on the chin. But I hope I've inoculated that risk a little bit by saying that, we know we don't always get it right, but we are trying. And we know that we've got to get our house in order, given what we're asking everybody else to do. And to that end, we've set ourselves an ambitious target to reduce our corporate emissions by 85% by 2025, en route to net zero by 2030. And we set out how we plan to do that in our corporate carbon plan, which is really based on these 4 key principles, which kind of map relatively neatly across to the 4 priorities that Maria set out earlier for SMEs. First of all, just the cheapest energy is and the best carbon saving is the stuff we don't use in the first place. So absolute focus on reducing our energy use at the outset. Second, we decarbonise what's left, principally through electrification of our heating and transport. Third, we generate more of our own energy from renewable sources. And finally, we're deploying smart technology to maximise the carbon saving opportunity. And I think important to say we've also put our money where our mouth is, investing heavily in the infrastructure we need to meet those targets. And just to give a couple of examples, we're in the process of electrifying the entire council vehicle fleet. We won't be the first council in the country to do this with our electric refuse trucks, but we will be among the first, I think. The first one hit the streets last year. 5 more arrived within the last couple of weeks, and the remaining 8 should be in place within the next year or 2. And important to say, this was alluded to earlier, we did a fleet review, and that taught us that the potential for carbon saving, there's almost as much to be saved through rationalising our fleet, downsizing the vehicles, not buying bigger vehicles than we need, squeezing a few vehicles out of the fleet, almost as much to be saved in carbon terms through that route as there is through electrification. So this is not just about swapping every petrol vehicle with an electric vehicle, and that's how you square that circle of increased capital costs that our previous speaker spoke about, or at least how you make it a little bit easier. Another quick example, our Bennett Road depot, not far from here, is one of our biggest emitters, and we've developed the ambition to make it a net zero facility. We're well underway. We've done the building refurbishment using that sort of fabric-first approach to make it as efficient as possible. We've ripped out the gas boiler and put the heat pump in. We're in the process of upgrading the EV charging infrastructure to accommodate that growing fleet that I talked about. We're installing solar canopies over the car parks to generate our own low-cost power. And in the fullness of time, we haven't quite got this bit sussed yet, but we'll be developing smart technology to optimise emissions reduction and minimise cost. Just a few of the other initiatives here that helped us bear down on our corporate emissions. So we've put an additional £1 million investment into heat pumps and solar in the new leisure centres, which you might be aware are being built in Reading. And that's in addition to a pretty high spec that we started with. We've completed now the switchover of our streetlights to LED, and now we're sort of tinkering with the trimming and dimming options to squeeze a bit more carbon out of that equation without really anyone noticing the difference in terms of the lighting that you see on the streets. And we're also taking the opportunities presented by hybrid working to get out of surplus assets and concentrate our activity in our more efficient buildings like our civic offices. Now, of course, I recognise that most of you don't have a fleet of refuse trucks or a leisure centre to decarbonise or a works depot, but the principles I talked about of our carbon plan that I hopefully have illustrated there, about reducing your energy use, decarbonising what you've got left, generating some of your own and deploying that smart technology, can apply to your organisations as much as mine. And I think the thing I'd emphasise is none of that is rocket science. It's all existing technology. It's all available. We haven't really pushed the boat out on anything, apart from perhaps the EV fleet where we are, where we really are at the sort of cutting edge of that in local government terms. But this is about doing all the sensible stuff early, and having done quite a lot of it a long time ago, long before I arrived. I think that's why the council is in relatively good shape in terms of its energy and carbon profile. So that's a bit about what we've done with our own estate, but there's a few examples here as well of how we're leveraging that wider influence that the council has to contribute to that much bigger pie that I showed in that earlier slide, to the wider borough carbon footprint. We've got a fantastic municipal bus company in Reading. If you've lived outside Reading, you will know that. If you haven't, get out and try it, and you will long for the days when you had a Reading bus arriving with the frequency and the quality of the service that we're blessed with here. And our investment in the buses and the infrastructure to keep them running smoothly means that we now boast the second highest ridership per head of population for buses outside of London, which is just evidence of the vital contribution which high-quality public transport makes to giving people alternatives to the car. And unlike a lot of our local authorities, we were in the position to finalise our local plan after declaring our climate emergency, so we're able to sort of tighten up some of the expectations and standards that that sets to align with our climate ambitions, notably with our groundbreaking zero carbon homes policy, which has been cited as an example of good practice by Friends of the Earth. You might not be aware that Reading owns about 10% of the housing stock in the borough, and we've invested heavily over the years in retrofit, such that the average EPC rating for an RBC home is already a C compared to the national average of a D. And C is the kind of target that government is trying to drag all of our housing up to by 2030. So you were a little bit ahead of the game on that, and some scary numbers to think about to push us up to the next stage. And we're also using passive house principles to inform the design of any new local authority housing that we build. And finally, although we were a bit late to the party with food waste collection, certainly others have done it before us, we got that up and running in 2021, and we saw our recycling rate leap from just over 30% to 52% within a year after the introduction. It's dropped a little bit since, but hopefully for the very good reason that the message about reducing food waste at the top of the sort of waste hierarchy is actually getting through. So there's a bit less of it to collect, and therefore it makes up a slightly smaller proportion of the waste stream. And I think one thing that's changed in the last few years is, this is easy for me to observe as an outsider coming into Reading, was, a lot of that work was going on under the radar. We weren't really talking about it. And various speakers earlier on spoke about the importance of telling that story. And we've been assisted greatly in that by the world-leading climate science underpinning climate action, our colleagues at the university, who we heard from earlier. And one of the many gifts the university has given to the world is the climate stripes data visualization, depicting the rise in average temperatures from the colder blue years to the warmer red, which you can now see on our buses, on taxis, the new biocarbon town centre. It's on the side of the Reading hydro plant on the Thames, and it's even on this season's Reading FC kit. And as well as achieving global recognition, that imagery is rapidly becoming a watermark, part of the watermark for the borough as a whole. And I would encourage you to use it in your work and engage your customers and clients in conversation about climate change as well. It's a fantastic tool. It's free to use. The university have made it open access, as it were. All we need to do is credit the excellent Professor Ed Hawkins at the university whose brainchild it was. So that's a bit about what we're doing. And I'm going to close with a few slides about how we're doing. So first of all, this is the picture for area-wide emissions for Reading Borough. So you can see from that they have fallen by 55% since 2005. And that is the fourth largest reduction out of 374 local authority areas in the country. So, we really are, at the front of the pack there. And that's not all down to local action. A lot of that is to do with grid decarbonisation, but of course every area benefits from grid decarbonisation. So, we really are doing something a bit different and a bit right in Reading by that metric. It's nowhere near enough, as we heard from our first speaker today. But you've got to take your little victories where you can, and we are heading in the right direction, and we should celebrate that, even though we know we need to pick up the pace to stay in line with our 2030 ambitions. And this is the equivalent trajectory over a slightly different timescale for the council's own corporate emissions. And we've been able to reduce our corporate carbon footprint by 71.3% since 2008-9, which is our sort of baseline year. And currently on track to meet our target of an 85% cut by 2025. But, not resting on our laurels, lots more to do and a bit more investment to make it happen. But, none of that has happened by chance. There's a lot of hard work over many years, a lot of planning, and a lot of investment that's made that possible. And no one said that taking action on climate would be easy. But if we do it, we'll have cleaner air, we'll have less congestion, we'll have safer streets, we'll have high-quality jobs, we'll have more economic opportunity, we'll have healthier lifestyles, we'll have healthier diets, we'll have lower energy bills at home and at work. So, it really is not all pain and no gain. And finally then, and Mike stole my thunder here, my rousing conclusion. Last year we submitted details of our climate action programme to an international body which has been mentioned today called the Carbon Disclosure Project. And their reporting platform, which is for cities and corporates, they've got two systems, one for local governments and one for private sector. Their platform is widely regarded as setting kind of the gold standard for environment and climate reporting. And by describing not just what the council is doing, but what a range of partners, including the university, the hospital, others in this room, by describing what they were doing and submitting our data, we were delighted to be added to what they call their A-list of cities taking bold climate action. And that's an honour reserved for only 12% of over 1,000 cities worldwide who disclose via that platform. And we learned only last week, so I should really update my slide to 2022, that we have retained our A-list status for another year following their latest assessment. It's a source of great pride for us and for Reading to achieve that recognition. We want you to be part of that and to share in that pride. We really look forward to working with you as we all play our part in tackling these great issues that we're facing in the form of climate change. Thank you. Happy to take questions or be accused of hypocrisy if anybody's got a nasty example they want to throw.
Are you expecting like rotten tomatoes to be chucked at this point, or what?
Goes with the territory.
Is that what it is? No, please. I guess we've all got a vested interest in the council, and seeing the numbers and the graphs for the first time today almost going downwards rather than upwards, we should all take a great source of pride in. But like I say, we've all got a vested interest in the council and the work they do to help guide our local community as well. So thank you very much, Peter. Come on, Colin, someone's got to use that microphone of yours. Thank you very much at the back.
Hi. Are there any plans to use the waste, particularly the bio-waste, to power the trucks and help move those around the town?
Well, yeah, I guess you could say that's happening already indirectly. So the food waste collections go off to an anaerobic digester over the border, and that in turn generates electricity which is pumped into the grid, which is where we plug the trucks in. So it's it's not happening in a local closed loop, but it is effectively happening. Like I say, there's another conversation to have about whether we could bring some of that closer to home, but you can imagine not an easy thing to fix in the short term.
Thanks, Peter. It's really good to see the progress. I was interested in the zero carbon homes that you touched on but didn't talk much about. I wonder if you had a bit more context around the progress made there and some of the challenges or opportunities for SMEs and business.
Sure, yeah. So it's a local plan policy. So it's, if you're going to build houses in Reading, you need to comply with the zero carbon homes policy. Basically, we set a standard that's higher than the minimum set in building regulations, which is the sort of very basic level that developers are expected to meet for development over a certain size. I think it's more than 10 dwellings. There is an offset mechanism within it, so if you can, the planners will push you to get as close to that as you possibly can. And if there's a bit left in the middle that we just don't have the technology or the wherewithal to deliver, or it looks like there's a risk of failing viability tests, if we push too far, then there is an offset mechanism to collect a financial contribution over, I think it's a 30-year period, or sufficient to cover a 30-year period. And we haven't got a lot in that piggy bank yet, but we expect there will be some in there in the fullness of time. And the policy decision we've taken is that the first port of call for any income that is raised via that source will be housing retrofit in another part of the housing sector in Reading. We may get overtaken if the national sustainability standards for new construction are pushed a bit further. In a way we dearly hope they do, and we won't be, we won't miss that income if it happens, but it's not happened yet. So it may have a shelf life, that policy, but it's certainly groundbreaking at the moment, and other authorities have been talking to us about how they could replicate that in their own context.
Peter, thank you. Oh, sorry, go for it.
Going back to the earlier presenter, Maria, she mentioned that one of the challenges was around the skills piece, skills and knowledge. Is there anything the council can do around that in terms of encouraging the uptake of skills
Yeah, definitely. And the question was about whether there's anything the council could do to help develop the skills agenda that Maria talked about. And in fact, I had a quick chat with Maria and Nigel Horton-Baker from Reader over the lunch break about that very issue, and I had to leave them to it while I went to get a sandwich. So Nigel might want to add to this. But yeah, undoubtedly there is more that we can do through our own provision, but also by working with organisations like Reader, where it's very much a big part of their agenda to promote that. And I think through our supply chain, through our procurement, our commissioning activity, just raising that expectation, requiring our partners and suppliers to work with us on those things. But and apprenticeships is very much on our agenda. It's something that we need to push. And we were handed our targets for apprenticeships in our different services only last week as a measure of how important that is to the council and the role that we have to play.